From modern warships to ancient sailing vessels, stay tuned to number 1 to find out the most powerful warships to ever exist. Number 10. USS Nautilus. When it comes to history books, there are some advances in technology that truly help change the war game for the better, or at the very least, to become more powerful. In 1951, the United States decided to create a new kind of submarine, one that just wouldn't be a threat under the water, but above it too. So they created the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear submarine. Released into the oceans of the world in 1954, this submarine was more than just a payload submarine. Oh no, it was far greater than that. For you see, most submarines had issues with making too much sound, which made them easily detected on radar. But with the Nautilus, it was capable of being completely silent on the ocean's floor and running through the water with virtually no trace. This silent running became a vital part of all future submarines and their construction. And this, of course, speaks nothing about the armaments on board. For not only did the Nautilus have the nuclear option, it also had the ability to unleash cruise missiles onto enemy ships or landmarks. By the time construction of the new submarine fleet was built by the US, a good majority of them had missile capabilities and were part of the new nuclear option. Number 9. USS Zumwalt. There are many classes of naval ships in the world, and destroyers are a big part of the naval combat the world knows nowadays. But the largest one that the United States has ever built was the USS Zumwalt. For this wasn't just a destroyer-class ship, it was effectively a mega-destroyer, measuring in at 610 feet in length and weighing 15 tons. This ship is truly massive, as were its building costs, at $2.2 billion, which is a lot of money to spend on one ship. But this is one ship that is not only worth the cost, it's effective at fooling the enemy despite its size. How so? Well, not unlike many modern warships, the USS Zumwalt was built with stealth technology. But instead of making the enemy think that they're not there at all, they actually confuse the radars into thinking that the ship is only about 100 feet long, a fraction of its actual length. This can actually be more effective than being invisible, as it would let the enemy make a mistake because they can't just look out a window at times to see you. The Zumwalt also has an impressive amount of weaponry and can attack targets around 63 miles away, and it can be outfitted with even more weapons should it need to be. Number 8. Yamato. Before we talk about this impressive craft, take a moment to like this video and join the Zero to Hero community by using the buttons below. In World War II, there were almost literally two kinds of wars being fought, a war on land and a war in the ocean. And the latter part of this war was almost solely fought between the United States and Japan. Each country had their massive warships and carriers doing whatever needed to be done in order to win the day. And for the Japanese, one of their biggest and best carriers in the fleet was that of the Yamato. The Yamato was a massive ship, even compared to most supercarriers of the world today. And at the time, she was the biggest ship the world had ever seen, and was able to do more than just about any other ship in the ocean. The Yamato was built to be an offensive juggernaut, including having 18-inch guns that had a range of around 23 nautical miles. That's a lot of range in the ocean, and she could take quite a beating too, as some of her armor was 2 feet thick in various parts of the ship. Needless to say, this was one very hard ship to defeat, and many ships were lost because of the Yamato. Number 7. The HMS Dreadnought. When it comes to designing the next generation of battleship, you really have one goal that you need to keep in mind. It has to be better than the last generation. But when the HMS Dreadnought was built for World War II, it was done in such a way it would make every single ship out on the ocean inferior to it. Its creation started the arrival of the all-big gun ships, and ones that could get as good as they could give. You see, the Dreadnought was a ship that was entirely encased in steel and had 12-inch guns that were guided by some of the most advanced technology of the time. In fact, it was that same technology that led many to think that the Dreadnought was more advanced than any ship made before it. And this would be the start of a trend that would go on for some time, adding more and more technology to ships. The only true irony is that its record in battle wasn't the best. However, it did sink a submarine. the first and only ship to do so for some time. Number 6 is Sumo. After their defeat in World War II, the Japanese were forced to revise their constitution so that they wouldn't be allowed to become a military power in the world anymore. This is one of the reasons they're more of a technological nation now. It literally says in their constitution that they're only allowed to use military for self-defense. That being said, it hasn't stopped them from trying to make one of the deadliest battleships in the world via the Izumo-class destroyer. This ship actually drew some controversy when it was first revealed because of how the Japanese laws stated. Yet, the country is adamant that it's not making this destroyer to take over or even fight off enemies per se. Rather, it's for relief efforts, as well as evacuations, which makes it all the more powerful as it has the ability to save lives rather than take them. That being said, it does have weapons on it, including being able to house helicopters and use anti-submarine armaments in case someone wants to try to mess with it. Number 5. Mikasa. The British are known for many battleships over the years, and in fact, it's a big reason why their empire has lasted as long as it has. But in the early 1900s, there was one battleship that reigned supreme for them, and that was the Mikasa. Ironically though, it wasn't the British who used this ship, it was the Japanese, and they used it to fight off Russian incursions in the Yellow Sea and beyond. Helmed by Admiral Togo Hayachiro, he used the ship's amazing capabilities with his own tactical brilliance to win the day over and over again. Even the leaders of other countries were astounded by how good the admiral was at the helm of the Mikasa. The Mikasa led the Japanese forces against 2 different Russian fleets of ships, and the Japanese won both times. This led many future ships to look at the Mikasa as the blueprint for how ships should be made. Number 4. Victory. It may seem insane to think about right now with the age of technology, but at one time, the most feared warships in the world didn't have machine guns or missiles or even engines. They had sails. And among the most feared of the sailed ships of history was that of the British man-of-wars. These terrors of the sea and oceans were Great Britain's most valuable resources in war, and few, if any, were as famous as the Victory. For the aptly named ship was helmed by Lord Horatio Nelson, who led this ship and the British fleet against a fusion of French and Spanish ships led by Napoleon. Despite being outnumbered, Nelson led the Victory to a win, and it became known as one of the most important victories in all time. The ship is docked permanently in honor of Nelson, who lost his life during the battle. Number 3. Missouri. Who says that all the most powerful ships in the world have to be ones who fired rounds at the enemy? While the USS Missouri was a warship, it became a bit more famous for its role in keeping the peace in the world at large. You see, this was the ship that the Japanese boarded in order to surrender in World War II. Then, when the Iron Curtain came to Europe, President Truman used the Missouri as a beacon of peacekeeping and promises by sending it to Europe to show the people that America hadn't forgotten its promise to them. The ship's role in history has been used by many over the years, including by former First President Bush in his memoirs. Number 2. USS Constitution. The United States had a great deal of pride after their victory in the Revolutionary War, and thus wanted to make sure that people knew that they were going to be a threat if they came after them. To help build up the first true U.S. Navy, the U.S. made a ship so strong and powerful that it was undefeated in battle, and it's still commissioned today, the USS Constitution. Named after the document that helped make them a country, the ship was released in 1797, and despite being a new country, the makers of the ship knew what they were doing. They made sure it was armed with cannons to take down enemies, but also speed and agility to evade them. In one battle with the HMS Guerriere, it took no damage because the ship's rounds couldn't pierce the hull at all. The ship is still in use by the Navy and honored for being the true start of the United States naval power. Number 1. USS Enterprise. In World War II, while the Allies were trying to take back Europe from Adolf Hitler and the other Axis powers, in the Pacific Ocean a massive war was being waged. One for the very oceans of the world. And it was a fight that was mainly between the United States and Japan. Japan had bombed the Hawaiian base of Pearl Harbor and brought the US into the war at large. And though the US wanted to take down Hitler, they wanted to beat Japan worse. But there was a problem. The Japanese fleet was more prepared, and arguably more skilled than them at first. And because of this, the United States lost many battles across the tide of the war, and at one point, all of the US carriers were sunk or heavily damaged except one, the USS Enterprise. As a carrier, the USS Enterprise had not only massive armaments on the ship itself, but was able to carry and transport many planes. For a long stretch of time, the Enterprise was our last best hope for victory, and the ship not only lived up to its expectations, it surpassed them. In fact, at one point, the Japanese actually thought that they had sunk the ship, and thus ended the war. But that wasn't the case. By the end of World War II, the Enterprise had not only survived, it had become the most decorated warship in the history of the United States. It is still honored for its service today. What do you think about these amazing warships? Let us know in the comments below and take care.